This week, we welcome back Corey Thuen, the founder and CEO of Gravwell, to discuss Zen and the art of logging from the cloud and on-premise. Maybe drink all the booze and log all the things, which I love as their slogan. So Corey will be here to talk about all things logging. In our second segment, we welcome back Peter Smith, the founder and CEO of Edgewise, to discuss how remote users and administrators can work securely from home. In the security news, authorities helpless as cryptocurrency scams rock Nigeria, C.S. Lewis on the coronavirus, Microsoft SMB 3.11 vulnerability and patch explained, Drobo 5N2 4.11 remote command injection, and we've got samples of that and how exactly the exploit is working. That's in the show notes, and we'll talk about it in that segment. A DDoS attack on the U.S. Health Agency as part of a coordinated campaign. A cyber attack hits the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and more. Stay tuned for all that and more on this edition of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise.
And welcome to the show. Let me introduce you to a man who is surprisingly not good at practicing social distancing, Mr. Paul Asadoria. Stop touching me.
We are all trying to practice social distancing. You notice Larry and I are much farther apart than we normally are to set an example and be safe in these very uncertain times. Of course, we are dedicated to providing you, the listeners, with the latest information security news because that needs to continue. Especially there's articles that are very much related to some of my concerns, and I'm sure our host concerns with infrastructure, especially as we are in the time of fighting this virus. So this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 644. It's being recorded March 19th, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Let's introduce the host first, Mr. Larry Pesce.
Oh, no other announcements?
I'm going to introduce the host and then do announcements.
Oh, all right, cool. So that's different. All right.
So Larry's here.
Hey, cool, yeah.
In studio, practicing social distancing.
Yep.
We have our hand sanitizer as well.
Yep.
I made sure I used it before I made your drink and such.
I was going to say, there isn't a bottle over here, but you probably couldn't have gotten the second bottle.
Right.
I'll just wash my hands in this gin and tonic and we'll be good.
That's it.
Yep. Good.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Welcome, Tyler.
Good evening. Definitely out in the middle of nowhere, protecting ourselves from whatever the bugs are today.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us.
Greetings all. I am practicing about 380-mile distance from you, safe distancing.
Nicely done. Also, Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Welcome, and for my part, I think Boise's far enough separation from G-Unit Studios, and I'm also properly separated from Tyler to protect him.
Wow,
that was a loud whistling, beeping noise, too.
Is that me?
I'm not sure who that was, to be honest with you. I'm sorry, I can't see the remote host on the screen. Am I missing anyone? Who am I missing? No, we're good?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, Jeff isn't here yet. Okay. So, quick announcement. InfoSec World 2020 was originally scheduled from March 30th through April 1st. This conference has been rescheduled. Currently, the dates are June 22nd through the 24th. Our listeners still receive 15% off a World Conference, World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020 and register with our discount code. Also here remotely, no stranger to the Security Weekly Network, Corey Thuen is the founder of GravWell and has spent over a decade doing cybersecurity at places like the Department of Energy, National Labs, Digital Bond, and IO Active. You can find out more about GravWell and get a free trial at securityweekly.com/GravWell. Corey, welcome to the show.
Hey, super excited to be here. I would like to point out that perhaps for the first time in the history of the United States, Idahoans at least equal the number of non-Idahoans on this particular show. So
Currently.
we've got a couple things going for us. We make our own toilet paper. I can go outside, cut down a tree right now. If I don't know if you've ever wiped your ass with a pine cone.
I have not.
That's part of the Idaho experience. So
A corn cob, however.
Oh,
Very similar from what I understand.
That counts.
probably.
Yep.
So, Corey, we were going to talk about some logging adventures, and specifically, my question for you is, how do we get logs out of the cloud? I admittedly have not spent a whole ton of time with CloudWatch or CloudTrail, so maybe start there for our listeners and how, at least in Amazon's cloud and maybe others, how we work with logs.
And in these times, can we do it without a lot of TP?
Yeah, let's talk about the adventures in logging and the shortage of log processed goods in our stores. No, man, conference calls this week have certainly been crazy. I'm sure it's like that for everybody, but so we got the webinar coming up next week, which is going to be a little bit more practical as well. We're going to actually dive into some of this stuff, but the topic, I guess, is kind of like logs in the cloud. So if you've got different cloud providers, you've got some on-prem systems. I think it's pretty rare that a given organization is 100% all in a particular cloud provider. So because the different cloud providers have some really cool tools, as long as you buy in kind of 100% to what they do. AWS has CloudWatch and CloudTrail, which we'll talk about a little bit. Azure's got their monitor. GCP has StackDriver, which StackDriver also works in AWS as well. But there's kind of these different tools out there for getting into that and how you're getting the logs out. But we can talk about that a little bit and how it sort of fits in with merging with on-prem. And also, if you want to get into the weeds, we had sort of a fun bug with Windows Event Forwarding. If we talk about,
I do want to talk about that as well. Absolutely,
it will be interesting to jump into. But yeah. So because you guys, Paul, you're at Security Weekly. You guys are PPWorks is set up in AWS, right?
It is AWS, yes.
Okay. So, because AWS has CloudTrail, which is like the API usage of like whether you're setting up instances, taking them down, that kind of thing. And so that's sort of like the auditing or administrative side of things. Is that something like, are you guys digging into any of that stuff?
Yeah,
right now,
so when I configure services in AWS, and I'm by no means an expert in doing this, especially on the logging side, I see options to integrate with CloudTrail, correct? Did I get that right? CloudTrail?
Probably CloudWatch if you're talking about integrations. So so CloudTrail is like their admin section, and I should couch this with I'm certainly not an AWS super expert, but we help our customers with some of this stuff, so I have to know some things. But yeah, CloudTrail is like the admin side, and then CloudWatch is sort of your aggregate, because they have an agent that you can install inside an instance, a CloudWatch agent, and then you can direct that at files within your instance. So you can point it at like your application logs or even var log messages if you want to get Linux-style system messages out and skip the syslog side of things and just use the AWS CloudWatch agent to act as sort of the broker or collector for the logs coming out of
I gotcha. So like when I did ECS if I sent logs to standard out as opposed to writing them to files, that was then there was like automatic check. Like I just checked boxes when I was configuring the containers, and it magically took those logs and like integrated them into ECS through CloudWatch or I get the terms confused.
Probably CloudWatch, yeah.
And then when we do EC2, right? We configure those hooks to come in there, and it, like basically as we march through AWS, I'm like, yeah, we should be logging that. And then Marcin comes to me and says the bill could be really high and stuff like that. And then we have to reconfigure it, right?
Yeah, we'll just ignore that piece for sort of right now. So let's pretend like the cost is worth it on all of this. But yeah, so you use CloudWatch. So that part's pretty nice because it used to be a lot more manual for how you would set up CloudWatch for all that stuff. But it seems like the AWS has gotten better at making that easier for people. It sounds like I haven't actually played with the containerized stuff and logging that so much as the instance.
They've made it super easy to do that in the ECS side. I know also, I think it was in EC2, if I wanted to log certain things, I had to tag things, and I hadn't tagged anything in this particular VPS.
Yeah,
right. So tagging, you make sure that you, as you deploy infrastructure, think about tagging, and we're doing that in our new, kind of VPS and infrastructure that we're building is being very formalized about tags. It's very easy to go, I want to tag. What do I need to tag stuff for? But you're going to run into instances where you can't log stuff because you're not tagging.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the higher point about sort of talking about AWS for people who are listening, watching, who don't necessarily do that, is that each cloud provider sort of has their nuances for all this stuff, right? In AWS, you also have to set up like identity. You use their identity system to give your containers or your instances permission to access the CloudWatch logs. So there's like a bunch of kind of some steps that you got to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully to make it a little bit easier.
And that's a great point, Corey. Sometimes Amazon makes that really easy and will set up the roles for you. Other times you're noticing stuff doesn't work, and it's because you have to go in and adjust your IAM roles and or policies to allow that to happen.
And usually it fails silently.
Yes, that is good. Like usually you're like, why am I not seeing something, or why isn't this working? And when you dig in, there's an IAM role or policy that is incorrect or not applied. Yes. Yeah.
So I think in security, it seems like logging is kind of it gets a bit of a boring rap, right? Like logging is not interesting. It's not sexy AI thready blockchainy stuff. But it's like the core of kind of not just on security side, but DevOps and even just just trying to see what the hell applications are working while you guys are developing PPWorks to make Security Weekly easier to produce. You're dealing with all these kinds of logs and everything. Like it's a very important aspect to tech and how we compute. Yet, it's not sexy. So we don't always give it the attention we need. But it's also non-trivial. You'd think, yeah, sure, we write to logs and then you just read the logs. But those days are 20 years gone, a little bit, at least 10, in terms of how easy it is. Just as we're illustrating by saying, just in AWS, if all you want to do is get the logs out of your stuff, yeah, there's all the kind of these different things that you want to do to make that interesting. So I suppose that could be a takeaway for people listening is like, yeah, it's non-trivial to get this stuff set up. And so dedicating some time to make it happen, at least in my opinion, is definitely a good thing that you want to do, even if you don't have a specific use case for the logs.
Because you will, right? You'll have a security event or some kind of performance event, like stuff starts going south. And like, I think I was at RSA. I think you might have been standing there when I was trying to troubleshoot something. I'm like, wow, I haven't really configured all this logging stuff. And so therefore I have no visibility as to what's going on. And now it's too late.
Exactly. It's a visibility thing. If you're not collecting it, then you get to the point where you're like, well, I sure would wish to debug this, but I can't. And so, but there's all kinds of aspects to that because there's the technical stuff about AWS that we're talking about. There's the developer change management side of things. If you want to add additional stuff to your logging and you're a big dev team, do you have to get that pull request approved? Like you got to go through change management for having this done. So
logging it's just different. Like I was playing around with the API gateway, and like by default they give you this dashboard that shows you that like stuff's making calls. Like aside from that, you have like no I couldn't find any other visibility without like digging in and configuring things, right? Or the feedback that you're getting from AWS CLI or whatever is interacting with that service you just stood up. There's like basic things in there. So I guess our collective advice, Corey, right, is you have to pay attention to this stuff when you're standing up these services and making sure. So and it's extra time, right, that you're going to have to spend learning, making sure it's configured, and verifying, like, does it actually generate a log when this type of event happens, and do I care about it or not, right?
Yep. Yeah, and checking all that stuff. So yeah, I think the piece of advice kind of, I guess, that I have, if somebody is dealing with trying to collect logs, get in one spot, is number one of the things you can do within a given environment. So we're talking about AWS, like use the tools in the cloud for a given provider. Let's say you're a company, you have some in Azure, you have some in AWS. So use AWS to help you create sort of a unified event bus, as it were, where you're either using CloudWatch to do that, or you're setting up Kinesis, which is more of a stream pipelining type process, and feed those event logs in, because then, regardless of what your consumer is, whether that's GravWell, which, hey, is totally the best tool for the job, but I'm obviously biased, or or you're using Splunk or Elastic or whatever tool you've got where you're going to collect those logs in for later analysis, right? You want to be able to search them, index them, all that stuff later. That juicy goodness, you should have some agnostic sort of data bus intermediary that allows you to better, it's sort of a separation of concerns.
Right.
Because it's sort of the concern of how do I get the data together, and then how do I feed it into some of this other stuff.
Corey, my somewhat technical question is, like, if I have EC2 instances, or I described ECS and it's generating logs in either syslog or like an ECS, right? It knows that when it goes to standard out, AWS has some way to collect those. So like in syslog and other services, how do I get those events and logs into Kinesis? I haven't done Kinesis yet.
Yeah, so if you use CloudWatch, it's easy. Otherwise, feeding Kinesis, I mean, it's fairly straightforward to develop the API. We actually have a customer who right now, that's one thing we're doing for them, is our ingesters are built, they're open source. That's the part of our platform that's open source, because this is kind of something we believe in, is being able to collect data. So our ingesters will normally send data directly to GravWell. But in this case, we want to set up a Kafka, which is, I believe, I'm like 95% sure that Kinesis is based on Kafka.
Gotcha.
And so they set up a Kafka sort of bus that's agnostic. And then our ingesters, we're modifying them to feed the Kafka bus. So it's an API change. So
I gotcha. So it ends up being an API that you interact with to send it events, basically.
Right. There's libs and stuff to help you do that, to build it into your your application logging or whatever, to be able to feed that. And then it hits the bus. And then once it's in that bus, like you can kind of let Kafka take care of who's published, subscribing, how it handles the reach back and all that stuff.
And it ends up being JSON data at the end of the day, right? It sounds like.
That's what most people do.
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons to JSON, absolutely. But we were just talking about, that was another thing that came up on the exact thing today with the customer, was because we're talking about like just shitloads of Zeek data, right? Just immense amounts. And if you do that in JSON versus TSV, you're talking about like a 10x in reduction. Not quite 10x, but it's a lot of reduction in size between JSON versus TSV. And then we talked about possibly binary packing that to get it, to a tenth. But
yeah, because then there's costs getting data out of the cloud and between services in AWS. As I'm trying to learn, not the hard way, because that can be a very costly lesson.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because costs are a little bit unpredictable by nature in the cloud, which is sort of a bummer. So when you're setting up something like, let's say you got a Kinesis stream, like that costs money, or you're using CloudWatch and dumping to an SQS bucket, or an S3 bucket, and using SQS, which is sort of another way to kind of query and get results out of data that's dumping into a bucket. Gotcha. Right? So the data gets dumped somewhere, and then we have something else, whether it's GravWell, Splunk, Elastic, to consume those things. Then you got to pay for that. You got to pay for where it sits. You got to pay for how it gets processed. So you can use like a Lambda function or a Kinesis stream to get the data out. But yeah, that's kind of how that's sort of one of the aspects of the cloud. That's the nature of things, is when everything's ephemeral, you have to pay for things that happen. And so I think that's probably a difficulty at organizations at organizations when they're fighting over budget and stuff. Like, we pay enough for the instances. Why are we going to pay extra for logging on those instances? Which is perhaps trouble.
It gets to be more of an application like development thing rather than back in the day when we had physical systems or even VMs and they're generating syslog and we could just point syslog wherever we wanted it to. And things were great. Now, when we move into cloud native applications, we've got various services that we're spinning up that are processing data, maybe putting it onto the next phase, and then another process is picking it up. There's security concerns there, of course, but also, cost concerns, and then making the decision of, well, what is really important? If there's a cost of moving logs from point A to point B inside the cloud, what are those costs for transfer, and what are, between services, cost for storage, and then cost to get it out, right? If we do need to get it out. Yeah.
So I don't want to tout our horn too loudly, I guess, but the way we solve that problem is we keep an instance in each cloud. So like if you have Gravwell and you're doing a cross cloud and on-prem solution, we have a Gravwell indexer that sits in AWS. We have a Gravwell indexer that sits in Azure and on-prem. And then we have what we call Overwatch that kind of lets you query these different indexers as if it was one single thing. So the data doesn't have to leave the place where it was created.
I see. So you're processing the data in the indexer in the cloud provider and just sending the results back, basically. Yeah.
We originally made that for MSSPs who might have different clients, right? And you don't want that data to mix necessarily. You don't want client A's data to mix with client B's because you might have some regulatory reason or whatever. And so we made it so that an MSSP could reach into these different things. But it turns out that's really damn useful within a single organization when they have cross-cloud stuff, when they've got inter-team stuff, where you've got your DevOps team versus your security team. And your marketing team, which might only get to access certain stuff, right? Being able to do that multi-tenancy Overwatch style turns out to be a pretty big thing, which is kind of cool to see as well. But
isn't that also going to save you like costs for moving data and stuff?
Yeah, that's what we're in and out. As well. That's the idea, yeah. And I'd be curious, like Jeff, I know you're like on the compliance side when it comes to cloud logging and stuff. Like I feel like that's an incurred cost as well. So if you have like certain retention requirements, I don't know if it's like keep it in the cloud space where it is, or do you send it into some like AWS Glacier or something where it's getting written to tape and it's super cheap long-term storage or whatever.
Or just skip it and plead ignorance and apply compensating controls.
Oh,
okay.
Or no, but seriously, for larger companies, I've seen them sort of trying to split the difference between doing stuff in the cloud, taking advantage of all that, but for storage, sometimes they'll revert back to more traditional forms of long-term storage. The retention requirements for a year.
Oh, okay.
Which can be exorbitant. Depending on what you're logging.
Yeah, depending. Yeah, if you're throwing that all in like hot storage. So that's one of the things that we do too, is we have like an age out system, so we can age out from like more expensive storage to slower, less expensive storage. And then even beyond that to what we call frozen data or cloud archive data, where you can drop it in like an AWS Glacier. And then we have sort of just in time analytics. If an event comes up and you need logs from a year ago or more for whatever compliance or whatever, then you can pull those out of Glacier, drop them into a new instance and do the analysis then. So there's all these aspects to logging that are pretty crazy.
In security, usually having to go back to a year is usually bad because that means your dwell time that you're looking at, if it goes back to a year, that could be bad.
So what you're saying is you should be confident in your security efforts and only log for a month or two because you've got everything covered.
Never.
Yeah, that's clearly the better solution.
And it all depends on what your policies state, how long
it also depends on your regulatory requirements.
Yes.
Yeah, so all that matters. Yeah, so yeah, for serious, like we both me and Chris, and actually a good chunk of our engineers were ex Department of Energy. So yeah, the compliance aspect was sort of core to when we were building the tool, how all that worked out. We wanted to do the retention of things, so we're trying to enable people to collect as much data as they want. Drink all the booze, log all the things is the new slogan that Paul gave us on the last show.
Yes.
Lee?
I'm just wondering how about complexity? I mean, you're using the cloud, so you're using AWS Glacier for their, say I'm in Azure, I'm going to use something there. I've got something on my on-prem. I mean, it all works, and I know it's really cool, but how do we keep people's heads from exploding trying to understand it and not freaking out that they've got three
that's a great question.
Immutable storage problems?
So we that kind of gets into the data management style question, and that we personally we kind of get because of how we engineered our tools. So our tools written in Go we own the entire stack. So it's not like we glued a bunch of open source tools together. So that makes it a lot easier, at least from our perspective, to do that. But if you're using something like Elastic or these other tools, then that can get a little bit difficult, right? Where you've got different tools and you have to run the same tool in Azure as you do there. Whereas with us, it's just a Go binary and we can run in containers and stuff. Then that can sometimes get maybe wily depending on, because each one does their networking and some permission stuff differently. We can't really get around like cloud permissions and roles and all the stuff that we were talking about earlier. But it does make it a little easier when you're deploying if you're just a monolithic binary written in Go for there's reasons why that's a thing, I suppose. It makes a lot of makes deployment, data management a lot easier when we have the full stack. So that's kind of an advantage for us. I can't really speak to the challenges faced in some of the other tools.
Corey, are there features within the product that tell me if, like, I've got logs that are local on-prem and in all the cloud providers, and I'm logging all the things, but all of a sudden something that I'm logging today is logging 50% more data than it was yesterday? Now, that could be that some administrator or ops person made a change, developer made a change, pushed some new code. It could be an event. It could be denial of service. It could be some kind of attack. So are there parameters to tell the operators essentially that some event has happened, that now there's a certain percentage more logging than there normally is?
Yeah, that kind of stuff happens all the time, right? The environment's changing. You got new logs. Events happen. Unexpected things can alter your traffic and the logs that you're generating. And speaking personally to us, again, we solve that problem with a different pricing model than the rest of the industry. So we think that pricing based on how much data you're generating or how many events per second you're doing or how many users you've got or whatever, all that sucks because it makes it really unpredictable. And it's unpredictable enough with like cloud costs. If you're talking about cloud where you're storing it, like that's unpredictable enough. Let alone an unpredictable license for the analysis on top of that. So now we said to hell with all that stuff. We just we solve that on the business side by just saying, if you get GravWell, like we scale up based on how many nodes you need, based on your compute or whatever, but it's a lot more flexible and loose because we say if you're usually doing 50 gigs a day and all of a sudden you do 300, we don't care.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Cost-wise, you don't care, but there's stuff in the software to have an alert that has happened.
Oh, yeah. So from a technical perspective, if that kind of stuff happens to you, you want you're going to want to know about that. You can look at your ingestion rates. You can set up some alerts around that to make sure you're advised when you have a big spike and stuff. But our big thing is we don't want to drop data, and so. If you kind of overwhelm like a single node, that's rough. But also one of the nice parts about how we deploy, because we're a Go binary, like scaling up is super easy. We can scale up automatically. Scaling down is a lot harder because then you're talking about merging data and deleting data between instances. But scaling up is nice. So if you hit these spikes and you need another node, you can kind of just do it if we set up our licensing appropriately.
And so that's based on your software architecture in addition to the various cloud architectures that let you scale up in your services?
Right. Right. If you're using some of the auto scaling type solutions. I mean, again, like I think in this discussion we're sort of oversimplifying what that looks like, because we talked about how complicated logging alone can be. Let alone
auto scaling, which is its own nuances, as we've already discovered, even with just deploying a small application into AWS.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the general idea. I think you're right.
And there's certainly costs associated with auto scaling. But you can put limits on it. You have to be careful because while your software lets your customers scale infinitely in terms of data, right, in your cloud, you have to make sure you configure it so that there's some type of ceiling in the cloud provider, so that you're not crossing some threshold that's going to cost you a lot of money, basically.
Right. And at the current time, we don't have like just some portal where you can go in and shove your stuff in ours. So all those cloud instances are managed by the customers at the moment. And so they build that into their current auto scaling.
Right. Jeff?
You got me spun up on PCI. Thanks a lot.
Drink.
Drink.
Oh. All right.
And you've probably said this already, and I apologize. I missed it or forgotten it or never heard it in the first place, or all of the above. Is there a limit to the types of logs that you're capturing? Are you absorbing logs from other more traditional things, or are you only looking at primarily like, the logs generated by the things in the cloud, making the cloud in containers?
Right. No, that's a great question, Jeff. Yeah, and when it comes to compliance, so the answer is, I guess, like the slogan, drink all the booze, log all the things. So the answer is no. So that's kind of the core difference between like a structure on read data agnostic, if we wanted to get into the data lake aspects of this, that we are, and Splunk is similar, but then you have your sort of structure on write solutions that are different. And that's one of the core benefits, is you can just kind of throw stuff at it and it'll go in. And then you parse it out when you sort of ask questions later. Go ahead.
So syslogs off of various operating system flavors, no problem. You can soak that up. Database logs, application logs.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. All that stuff, even NetFlow. And so like we do binary data. That's one of our core sort of differentiators or things. So we'll take packet captures and NetFlow and drop that into our system as well, and then you can analyze that directly. So basically anything you throw at GrabWell, it'll put in, and then you can attempt to search it. All
right, I got you. Excel spreadsheets or Notepad?
Yeah, I mean they'll go in, and then what's an Excel? That's like a encrypted, or sorry, a gzipped XML file.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you pipe in a module that says ungzip, and then do XML parsing, and sure, yeah, why not? I think you would be insane. I would discourage you from doing such a things, but that's the idea. And we didn't set out to, like, we have a customer who had some NetFlow analysis stuff that they were doing, and they kind of replaced those with GrabWell. That wasn't really our intention. We're trying to make sort of a log aggregation tool to be able to do that. But being able to like packet captures in a forensic type environment. I don't know if you've ever tried to load a 500 gig packet capture in Wireshark, but it doesn't go well.
It goes really slow for a while, and then usually crashes
and then dies.
But if you dump that in GrabWell, like we're built to handle data that size, so you dump it in GrabWell and you say, let me search for this whole thing and let me find packets like on a given port between these two hosts, right? And then within GrabWell, we don't have some of the cool stuff that Wireshark does. But once you filter it down like that, you can export it as a PCAP, then load it into Wireshark, and you're good to go.
Oh wow! So I could have used that this week too. Damn it!
Yeah. So there's so being data agnostic that way opens up sort of all kinds of opportunities to do some fun stuff, which has been pretty fun to see.
Now, so sorry, Jeff. Did you have more questions?
I had one more question.
Sure. Go ahead.
I mean, you've been on the show several times. You've been, friends of Security Weekly for quite a while. Who do you see as the competition in your space? Is there anybody up and coming? Anybody you're leaving in the dust?
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to name names.
Talk about the market a little bit. No, I'll name names because I'm a couple. You said PCI, and then I finished my beer, so we're a couple in. No, the reality is like, so I think in terms of the market here, and this is why we founded the company, is because there's kind of like Splunk and not Splunk.
Yeah.
In a way, when it comes to data analytics. What I mean by that is it's like you have Elastic, and Elastic is kind of like a set of wrenches. Like it's sized out, and for a given size bolt, you can apply a lot more torque than you can with like an adjustable wrench. So GravWell and Splunk are more like an adjustable wrench. You can just throw whatever in, you tweak your query language, and that gets you stuff out, and you're analyzing a lot more types of data, all within it. And there's a couple of other interesting startups out there doing some stuff. There's like Humio. I think they're out of the EU. They're doing some of this. I don't know how they have some real-time processing that's really interesting. I'm not sure how their long-term retention stuff. I haven't played with it, but listeners would be encouraged to check it out. But honestly, I feel like we've seen Splunk killers, quote unquote, come along, every couple months. But it's like they take Elastic and they put something on it. And the fundamental reality is that Elastic is not the same type of tool that Splunk is, or that GravWell is, because it's a different approach to how you're doing the analysis of data. And that's been something that I feel like the market has been hesitant or had troubles doing or addressing for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's interesting, Corey, when and I speak with a lot of these companies, right? When you ask them what's under the hood, you have to get to like the actual engineers that are implementing it. Like no one else really knows, right? I mean, you're very transparent in that. Like, look, we built our own Go application to do what we intended to do, and let you send us everything and parse it out later. When in some of these other companies, like a lot of their employees don't know what's under the hood. Not that that's a bad thing, right? But sure. I think we need to encourage the security community to start asking these questions, and then start to understand how that might help you solve your problem or not, right? And you could have a problem that they absolutely solve, right? But until you dig into all these details, develop your own requirements, and understand how each vendor is doing it differently, you're not going to find the right match until you dig into the weeds and get answers to these questions.
Yeah, and even opening the kimono a little bit more, like on our sales thing, that's one of our best qualifying questions that I like to ask is, do you understand a situation in which you would choose Splunk versus a situation in which you would choose Elk
right.
or Hadoop or whatever, right? And if they can't answer that question articulately, then that changes the conversation that we have with them, because if they're looking for a more general approach or a specific use case versus the actual flexibility and power and that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting aspect to data analytics that really you don't get into unless you really start diving into things. So
if they can't answer that question, how are you having a conversation with them in the first place?
So honestly, speaking for us, because we're a fairly young company, really, and we don't have all the bells and whistles that people want, generally, if the answer to that, if they can't answer that question, then kind of we're like, well, we're probably not necessarily a good fit for you right now, maybe in a year or 2 years, when we have a lot more clickability, user friendliness or whatever, right? You don't have to know, you don't have to be like a super senior analyst to be able to. But the super senior analysts are the people that love us the most, because they can get in and they feel super powerful because they can do literally anything they want with any data and be able to combine NetFlow alongside DNS, alongside Windows events, alongside their cloud stuff, and be able to do that and rip and just solve problems and answer questions. Somebody has a question, they come in, they're like, hell yeah, I can answer that question. I got all my stuff right here. That works really well.
But that's a great point, Corey. Those that know the precise questions to ask will have a great time with GravWell and be like, oh, this is the tool I was looking for, right? Those that maybe struggle with, I really don't know what questions to ask yet. Like, I know I need data, and I know it can answer some of my questions, but I don't quite know what to ask. May need something that is a little more templated and user-friendly, right?
Yep, that's speaking frankly, that's absolutely true of where we're at. And we're coming out, like, if you need a playbook to follow, I mean, that's something that's on our roadmap. Absolutely.
Sure.
Coming out with really cool. In fact, next quarter, we've got kits that are releasing, which is kind of like GravWell kits are sort of like apps on top of, it's like, you've got Zeek, install the GravWell kit for Zeek, and then you've got this pre-built stuff, right? So then you come out of the gate with some stuff. But nice. That's the reality of it.
Now, Corey, you mentioned Windows event logs. And I know that can be, from what I've heard, somewhat of a nightmare. Talking with John Strand and some others at RSA, the power of Sysmon giving you that per process, information and visibility is very powerful. And I believe, obviously, you would support that. We were established, like, if you were to send you Sysmon, you would ingest that because you ingest...
Sysmon's awesome.
Yeah, and Sysmon is great. But you had a story about Windows event logging.
Yes. So the answer is, I mean, you should definitely do Windows event logging. And they have, like, Windows event forwarding is a way to take logs from one machine and send it up to sort of a central thing. And then, so there's different, like, actual Microsoft Windows ways to do events. But we had an interesting bug that came up. So at GravWell, our cardinal sin, where it's like we spin up the red lights and people are on call, our phones start buzzing, is if we have a report or a user says, hey, I think I'm missing data. Like, that's sort of the cardinal sin of, like, hey, it's one thing to be like, oh, my chart doesn't look as pretty or whatever, right?
And it's one thing to drink all the booze, but you have to log all the things.
You got to log all the things. If you drink all the booze and don't log all the things, people don't.
It's only half the picture, right?
Right. Exactly. So we had that going on. And so it turns out, so here's the bug, is it's like we have, so our Windows ingester is open source, right? And we use Windows APIs to get at the Windows event system. And Windows has some APIs there. And I didn't, let me just caveat by saying I didn't work on this bug, but I understand. And I talked with the people who did work on it. So if I get something wrong, I'm sorry. But the essential bug is like, so when you register for events in Windows, so Windows has different channels and then they've got different events. And there's this event record ID, which is an ID that increments one at a time for each event that gets put out on a given channel. And then, and when you register to collect those events, you provide Windows like a timestamp. You say, I don't want any events before X, 2 days ago or whatever, is what you do. And so then Windows will start you there. And then, at least for how our ingester works, is we create a bookmark that says, okay, this is the latest event that we've seen. And we kind of track that so that if we lose connectivity back to the index or whatever, we're not losing data, right? We want all of the events to get to the index. But there's sort of this bug that happens. It's exacerbated by Windows event forwarding. But if you start generating events, as an example, when you register, you can also provide Windows a function that's like, if the event time difference from the previous one I saw is less than whatever, like, don't give me old events, is the type of thing that you provide for when you call the API. It's like time created versus the time diff between the system time and the time of the thing is less than the previous thing, then don't do it. Okay, so what you're doing essentially is time math. You have one timestamp minus another timestamp in order to do the difference. Normally, timestamps increment, right? You have A is less than B most of the time. But what if it's not? And what if you use an unsigned integer to store the value of two things mathematically different in time?
Ask you how you know this?
Right? So normally you're like, oh, these are different by 50 milliseconds. 10 milliseconds because I did the math. But then sometimes you're like, oh, it's 65,000 or whatever, whatever the max UN32 value is, then that becomes the difference in time. And so then Windows, so Windows says, well, you don't have any because your difference in time is this or whatever, right? And so we were kind of dropping. So what would happen is if events were created and then you would hit NTP, and NTP would set the clock back by a second because of clock skew or whatever. Not a problem in VMs or the cloud, incidentally, right? Or much less of a problem. But if you're talking about actual on-prem systems and you're forwarding events off of this stuff, like that actually matters. Clock skew is a thing. And so, so it'd be like, oh, the clock jumps back. And so then this, handful of events that went in between those two got dropped because of the way that we initialized our ingester, which is sort of a bummer. And it's not really well documented. Like, we use the documentation from Microsoft that says this is how you're supposed to call this. And so, and also our ingesters are sort of based on some of the open source stuff out there. And so the solution was we just remove the maximum reach back and do a little bit of extra to make sure we're at the wrong thing. So instead of saying, give me events, but only within the last 72 hours, we just say, give me all events after we do this little tiny thing up front to figure out what's going on. And then the problem goes away because Windows is no longer trying to sort of help you. You don't provide it this function to help you with this stuff, which is sort of one of those things that unless you're doing massive, Windows event collection or getting into logs or even sort of figuring this out, or then you're not even going to see that even happened. Like, how many people would even notice?
Right. And the other thing is, anyone that's done any programming and work with date and timestamps, it's a huge nightmare in any language, right? Just figuring out, because you've got time zones, you've got so many different date formats.
There's only one time zone.
The one you're in.
Unix time.
UTC.
UTC, yes.
The one you're in. Who said the one you're in?
I said the one you're in.
That's the correct.
So, comment and a question. I'm a little disappointed. I thought we were going to be talking about a race condition, which I don't think we've ever talked about in the time that I've been here. My second comment, which is a question: are you at all concerned that in removing this limit, you're not creating some other logic error that you just haven't stumbled upon yet?
Yes. So we revamped our init process. So we ask for and find sort of a timestamp. So we're doing that internally instead of offloading that to Windows is sort of what it turned into. So I don't think that's a problem, but I suppose in like a worst case scenario, then we have duplicate old events.
Well, you didn't just remove the limit. You did a little bit more than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So the fix was remove the limit when you ask for it from Windows, but then we had to add additional logic to fix that part. Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want every time the ingester connects, you don't want to get every Windows event that's in the entire log, even if you've already seen it. So yeah, we had to add that little extra stuff. But sort of as a side effect, then now this customer had been able to figure out, like right away, they said, "Wait a minute. Can I see which hardware skews more than others?" And we said, I don't know. I suppose with this, I suppose we could. Let's do it. So then we crafted out the query and said, okay, turns out, this particular vendor skews more than the rest of the vendors based on the NTP updates or whatever, which was kind of a crazy thing. That's
that's
funny
really cool
to see them do. But yeah, there's all kinds of good stuff in Windows logs, but most people, there's such a nightmare structurally and whatever that it can be difficult to get the value out. I suppose I'll say it that way. That's why Sysmon is nice, because it's sort of like the value's just there.
I think it's one of the reasons why I decided early on that my focus was going to be Unix and Linux and deal with syslog, because when I was doing Windows stuff, I looked at Windows events and I was like, that's just a hot mess. Like, I can understand syslog. I can make that stuff work. I'm going to focus more on Unix and Linux.
So,
and they're big too. They got a fat ass. So if you're talking about, like we were saying earlier, where you take the events and you're sticking them, you're paying for every bit in the cloud. Like if you're doing Windows events, that's a lot of stuff for sure.
Lee.
Yeah. So I keep thinking about a model where I want to forward all my logs to a central server, not leave them in their native. Don't go query Windows to get them. But it seems like you've got a better way. Just query the Windows server to pick them up. But is the problem with skew anyway impacted by whether you're using Sysmon or WLS or just getting in there more natively? Or is it just really a base case?
No, that part's not, because pretty much everything grabs it from the Windows events API or using the EVTX stuff. So it's all like stored initially in the same way, I believe. So how you get it out doesn't matter. But that's our goal is to try and help people to be able to do exactly that, like get all your logs in one spot.
Yeah, but I assume because you did time in DOE, you'd heard of WLS.
No, I can't say that I have.
I think Argonne created it. It's a tool that takes Windows events and forwards them to syslog.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's been a few attempts at that.
So nothing could possibly go wrong.
Nothing like the bug that Corey just described could happen, right?
Oh, I got better ones.
I found early on that was the wrong approach to convert Windows events into syslog. Like it was
I
just
was kind of backing into that.
Yeah, it's always been ugly to try and do that.
I mean, that's so. Obviously, I'm biased again, but that's my opinion. And sort of the Gravwell way is no converting. Whenever you convert, you lose information.
I agree. Yeah.
Bingo.
So don't do it. Is our philosophy. Just send it as is and sort it out, afterwards. Because we don't want to translate.
Gotcha. More questions for Corey?
I don't know. I had a question for Tyler. Did he get a new VW or something?
Yeah, what was that noise?
Motorcycle.
Someone's...
No. I'm curious about the, so you said you're data agnostic. Do you guys find yourselves leveraging this tool inside of environments that don't typically get good coverage for loggings? Things like ICS or IIoT or maybe even manufacturing? Are those kind of the areas that you guys specialize in as far as receiving some of those disparate logs?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say we specialize there just because, kind of like I said, like a bunch of us are ex-DOE. So, ICS is near and dear to our hearts. You've got plants, you've got weird PLC equipment, you've got, proprietary protocols, you've got this kind of stuff. We want to be able to help those people too. That was kind of how we sort of started out. So, yeah, that's
Where do you
typically
see those end up landing as far as like your Purdue level? Are you guys sitting at like Purdue level like 5, or were you trying to put something in at Purdue level 3 and then pushing them out to something else?
No, even so Purdue level, you're talking like at the we'll actually cross levels. So like you'll have like 3 and 4 will be kind of set up. Sort of this is using the Overwatch that I was talking about a little bit earlier, and like 2 and 3. Based on how I think I'm getting those numbers right. It's sort of been a while since I
you're right.
looked at that, but yeah, in terms of how the network is segmented, where that's out, which part of the ICS you care about. So for people who are maybe less familiar, like the Purdue model for ICS kind of separates out your ICS equipment, because I think you guys have talked about enough of this show. Like ICS is it wasn't designed with security in place. Like these are proprietary protocols. Sometimes like they have a length field in the protocol, and if you lie to the length field, then everything breaks. Sometimes so the Purdue model is kind of like separating out the network segmentation. I mean, you guys are talking to Peter later, right? So that's his Peter Smith and like zero trust networks and microsegmentation and all that stuff. That's all really important. But for ICS, that's not always possible because of how legacy things are. Is maybe a way to put it, but we try and enable people to be able to do that. Absolutely, that's that's our thing. Log all the things, right? So we have customers that are, in fact, some of our biggest customers are in the ICS space, doing this on plant level manufacturing, power generation, power delivery.
That's awesome.
Neat stuff.
Any more questions for Corey? Corey,
for me.
Thank you so much for coming back on Paul's Security Weekly. Always wonderful having you on the show, albeit virtually. But that's, we'll take it. It was nice seeing you at RSA and sharing beers and stuff. Our conversation was equally as lively after several beers
Absolutely.
at an event. So, Corey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Always. Thanks.
SecurityWeekly.com/Gravwell. Make sure you go there and get your free trial. They also have an open source version. It's all available on SecurityWeekly.com/Gravwell. We'll take a short break, come back with Peter Smith from Edgewise. Stay tuned.